So my topic for today, I chose, typically I do that data talk as my second talk here, but I decided that, and Bob and I talked about it, that the common perceptions of free trade have been changed a lot over the last few years, particularly in America, with the Trump campaign, and I assume there are issues here in Israel as well about the virtues or negatives about trade issues. So I'm going to talk about trade, and I'm going to be doing it from what I hope is a very accessible perspective. How many of you have taken a class in economics where you learned about comparative advantage? Raise your hand. Okay, so I'm not going to do anything about comparative advantage. It's going to be kind of straightforward and simple, but like all economics, it's nothing's really straightforward. So in America, what we hear is that we made a really bad bargain as a nation. We opened up our borders to trade in 1994 with Mexico and Canada, which is called NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And in 2000, we liberalized trade with China. And the claim is, while that was good for the economy, it was bad for people. And you may remember on the first day of our lectures, I made a big point out of the fact that I don't think we should talk about what's good for the economy. We could if everybody benefited the same when the economy did well, but that's not always true. So I'm interested in who wins and who loses, because in general, it's complicated. It's not everybody gets a 10% increase in their standard of living when trade happens, right? Some people get a big change, some people get a small change, and some people have a negative impact to trade. So I want to try to give you the flavor of who I think wins and loses from trade that I think is missing from the common public conversation about this. The standard story, the negative story about trade you hear, and this, by the way, it used to be that if you wanted to hear a negative view of trade, you had to turn on the TV and watch a TV commentator who was not an economist, who liked getting people riled up. But for better or for worse, a lot of serious economists have raised questions about whether trade is good, and in particular whether trade has hurt certain kinds of workers. And the standard story, this negative story that you hear now, goes something like this. Yes, we trade with China, and it's true that because of that we get really inexpensive clothing and really cheap toys for our children, and inexpensive or less expensive devices and gadgets that are produced by the Chinese people instead of by our higher wage American workforce. So that's the benefit, and what's the cost? A lot of workers lose their jobs, okay? Now, if that was the end of the story, I don't think I'd be pro-free trade. I mean, that's a horrible deal. Slightly cheaper stuff to destroy millions of people's lives so that I can have a shirt that's, say, $35 instead of $50, or I can have a toy that's $7.99 instead of $20, and in return I ruin the lives of millions of manufacturing workers in the United States who now have trouble finding alternative work. So one view of the story, and I think this is partially true, but one view of the story says, well, after the workers lose their jobs, what happens? They find new jobs. And some of them will make more money than they made before, some will make less, most will make less probably, but at least they have jobs, their lives aren't ruined, they just have a period of hardship, and that's the end of the story. What people are worrying about now in the United States, and I think it's a legitimate worry, it's complex as we'll get to, but what people are worried about now in the United States is these people don't necessarily find good jobs, or maybe any jobs. That the skills that they bring to the table are now not very valuable outside of the places they worked before the trade increased, okay? Everybody understand that point? Okay. But I think that's the wrong story, okay? I think that's only a very small part of the story. And to give you the full part of the story, I want to tell you a different kind of story that on the surface has nothing to do with trade, okay? But by telling this story, which is like, well, why are you telling us this story? By telling you this story, you're going to say, wow, I never thought about that connection. And it'll help us see the effects of trade without the emotional baggage that we bring when we talk about trade, okay? Because part of the challenge with trade is what? It comes from a different country, right? It's foreigners. And we have sometimes in our hearts, whether we know it or not, a certain tribalism would be the word in English, I don't know what the equivalent Hebrew word is. You know what does that mean? That word means something to you, tribalism. It's us versus them, my side, my color, my flavor, etc. So we have a certain suspicion, often ingrained in us genetically perhaps, about other people who aren't quite like us. And trade has provocative aspects of that. So I'm going to give you an example that doesn't have that aspect, okay? And then we'll bring it back to trade. And it's a fun example. So here's the example. Somebody develops a pill that you can take, and if you take the pill, you have no health problems for the rest of your life. You don't get cancer, you don't have heart problems, your knee doesn't get weak and need a replacement. You never get sick until you turn 120 and you drop dead and die. Okay? Everybody understand the pill? You live to 120 with no pain in your life, and then you die a peaceful death. So my question is, and the person who develops this pill, this great scientist, she's so nice, she decides she's only going to charge $10 for the pill. It took her a lifetime. Thousands of people worked on it, but she's going to sell it for $10. Now my question is, should we allow the pill to be sold here in the United States or in Israel? And would you want, who's interested? Raise your hand. We all are, I think. It sounds like a good deal, beats the alternative. $10. It's a bargain. So I want you to think about a few different things. Who benefits from taking the pill? Who loses because of the fact that millions of people are going to take the pill? And is it, quote, good for the economy, the way we measure economic activity in a modern economy? And we might, of course, think about short-run impact. I'm going to think of three different levels. Short run, which means in the next year or two. Long run, over the next 20 or 30 years. And then you might call it super long run, or what you might call intergenerational, the impacts on my children and grandchildren. So I care about my quality of life now. I care about it going forward, because I'm going to be here for a while, I hope, right? But I also care about my children and grandchildren's lives, too. I don't just care about myself. So think about it for a minute. What's the impact of this pill? Well, right away, there's going to be a bunch of people who are immediately totally useless, given an enormous investment in skill that they made. Who are those people? Doctors are done. Nurses are done. Hospital administrators, done. That's just the beginning. There are more. Give me some more. Insurance companies, done. Which? Pharmacists, chemists who work on pharmacy, who worked on drugs, right? Done. Medical schools, closed. Teachers in those schools, done. What? Lab what? Labs, done. All that stuff, done, closed. And those are what? Very high-wage jobs. Those people are suddenly unemployed. So what happens to GDP? It's going to go way down the first year. I mean, it's going to be horrible. It's devastating. Those people are going to be unemployed. Now, would they have the chutzpah to go to the government and say, I don't think you should allow this pill to be sold? I mean, I think doctors are very important. Now, it'd be awkward because it's their field, right? And they're supposed to care about human beings, right? And by the way, they get to take the pill. They get the benefits too, but their costs are going to be very different from mine. What are my costs? $10. Their costs are $10 plus, no more income. Bad, tough. Now, a lot of those people are very talented, but not all of them, right? Many of them are not so talented. By talented, let's say trained, right? Somebody goes to medical school for 6 years and then does an internship and a residency. All of that investment is now worth zero, which is very unpleasant for those people. But a lot of those people are pretty talented. They will find something else to do. And more importantly, it's very important, the person who is in college right now who is dreaming of being a doctor and planned to go to medical school will now not go, not invest, and will turn and find something else. And those people will have lots of skills. Whether the pill cures cavities and straightens your teeth would be an issue, because some of those people might be able to become dentists or orthodontists and have something else to do that's kind of like medicine. Maybe they'll become veterinarians. Although maybe people will give the pill to their cats and dogs. Well, it might not work on cats and dogs. So there'll be some things for these people to do, but pretty unpleasant in the short run. Long run, still not so pleasant, right? 50-year-old doctor who has trained their whole life, who's a great surgeon, a great orthopedist, a great neurosurgeon, those people are suddenly looking at a future that's very depressing, very empty, without the satisfactions that they were looking forward to, without the money, and without the meaning that their lives had before when they were helping other people. But there will be people in those businesses, the hospitals and the labs and the doctor's offices, who are not highly skilled, right? They're going to suddenly be unemployed, and they'll find, if you were, say, a receptionist, you can be a receptionist at a different kind of place than a medical office, but it might take a while to find a job because there could be a lot of unemployed receptionists, and suddenly it might be quite difficult. There was a but here.
Yeah, I think that all these doctors and labs that will be eventually lose with this change. From the beginning, they were here and with this business because due to progress in the technology.
Right.
And I mean, 100 years ago, probably there won't be that much people doing this.
Correct, absolutely.
So they will probably do something else.
Yes, absolutely. They will do something else, and they have, of course, benefited their whole life from the process of technology up until this moment, when now it suddenly bites them in the backside. Right? It's like, this has been great, all these new opportunities for doctors and nurses and lab technicians and chemists, etc. Now all of a sudden, those are gone.
But,
Yes?
but, I mean, they should be satisfied because they won. They help people survive.
Yeah. And so if I'm a cab driver, and Uber comes along, and I've been making high wages because I have a monopoly and they can't allow anyone to enter the cab business, so when Uber comes along and then introduces driverless cars and now I have nothing to do, I should be happy that people are now able to get from where they want to get to where they want to go, and my life is now complete. Probably not, right? And now for the doctors, I take your point that it's very satisfying to know that people aren't going to suffer anymore from disease, but they have to face the reality that they have no income. And they have to face a deeper reality, which I want to emphasize, that money isn't everything. And part of the suffering and challenge of this world for them is that their purpose in life, you could argue it's been achieved, but I think they're on a day-to-day basis are going to have some pain and suffering, okay? Now, that's not the whole story. That's one of my themes of today. And that is the following. And this is the single most important thing we're going to talk about today that you probably may not have thought of before, but there are other things I hope you learn, but this is the most important thing. Those of us who are not doctors, not nurses, etc., are going to have more than just living to 120 as our benefit. What is that? We're going to have a lot more money to spend than we had before because we don't have to pay for health insurance and we don't have to pay taxes for the government programs that helped us or helped the poor or helped the elderly in the United States or that subsidized health care. So we are going to be massively richer in a monetary sense. We're going to have a higher standard of living. An hour of work on our part will get more stuff than it got before because we now don't have to spend, after the $10, anything on health care. What are we going to do with that money?
Buy stuff.
I'll do a question, quick question. I don't want
What
to-
you said is conditional on the fact that everyone else finds a different job.
No, they haven't found a different job.
I mean, more money won't help us.
Well, we're going to see. Right, so I've got more, I see what your point is. I'm going to get to that. I get your point. So I'm going to have, my income will be higher. The question is, I'll get to that right now. What will I spend it on? Now that I don't have to pay for the knee operation, I don't have to buy the glasses, and I don't have to have the surgery, I don't need the chemotherapy, and my hair the head is full of hair because I don't have the stuff for my hair treatment, which I don't use. But anyway, yeah. I'll buy more what? According to my personal preferences. So the real answer is what will I buy more of? Answer, I have no idea, right? And it could be I may choose not to buy more stuff, but to do what? Work less, save. I may decide I'm going to have a better retirement. I may decide I'm going to work fewer hours and spend more time with my loving children, or my beautiful wife, or reading poetry, or playing the guitar, or surfing Twitter mindlessly for hours because I don't have to work as hard. So all those things are possible. We'll each make, it'll be virtual reality probably by the time the pill comes along. I'll spend my time on Safari in virtual reality. So I'm going to have more of something. Now, Gal raises the point, but there won't be more of anything. And my answer is yes, there will be. Because why? What will happen? People will have what? The market. What's going to happen? We have all these people who are looking for work, right? Some of them, not all of them though, some of them are going to be put to work in what? New products that are going to come along that people are going to invent, and the expansion of the demand for old products that we're just going to have more of. So we're going to get more of certain things we already enjoy, and we're going to get new things we hadn't enjoyed before. And you say, well, is that really going to happen? I'm going to tell you a story in a minute, a real story that maybe will help you feel that that's true, okay? So we're going to be wealthier as a nation, correctly, eventually, not the first 6 months, but eventually the economy is going to get actually bigger because we don't have to pay for health care anymore. But it may take a while, and some of the people who have the skills now for health care will not be useful in those new things or won't want to do them or be too old, can't change their life, and they're going to struggle. And we're going to come back and talk about the people who don't fit in, who can't find a new opportunity, who are left behind. Maybe it's coal miners in West Virginia. Told you we'd talk about it. But this happens all the time in a modern economy. New things happen, and they make certain skills obsolete. You know, a great example in my field will be, I'm hoping that online education will get sufficiently effective that we don't need as many teachers, which would be great for the world, especially in places where they don't have good access to good education, like, say, the United States. Anyway, so it's a great thing. In the short run, it's really hard on some people. In the middle to longish run, it maybe is not so bad. But some of those people are going to have trouble. But the point I want to emphasize is that this magic pill will not just mean that we are spending less on health. We're going to get more of something else that we can't identify right now because I don't know what it will be. I mean, imagine being in 1990, it's not very long ago, about when you were born, and your parents saying, I wonder what the world will look like as my children go into college and start to graduate and go into the world. I wonder what their opportunities will be. And they would have been totally blind and could not have imagined, literally, what your world looks like and what our world looks like today. So we're going to get, it's not just, oh, cheap health care and lost health care jobs. It's cheap health care, lost health care jobs, and more of something else, and actually a lot more, because the proportion of our economy that has to be devoted now to health care is quite large. And so our opportunities to have more of something else, whatever it is, whether it's savings or leisure or new goods or more of the old goods, is going to be quite extraordinary. Of course, this process was called creative destruction by Joseph Schumpeter. Creative destruction. Creative, new product. Destruction, tough on the old product that can't compete with the new product. Creative destruction is the engine of productivity. It's the engine of what increases our standard of living, not as dramatically as this, of course. Trade, and by trade, I really mean buying from foreigners, but of course we have domestic trade, which is quite important also. And I really like an argument, which I'm not going to push now, but I like a very important argument is, it's really not national borders deceive us. Who we trade with is not that important. Our natural tendency, our tribalism, is to focus on trading with people here versus trading with people somehow on the other side of this invisible line called the US-Canada border or the US-Mexico border. So a person who's here is in El Paso, Texas, and it's okay to trade with them because the money stays in the country, but once this person's 3 feet this way, suddenly, oh, it's bad. That's international trade. That means the money leaves the country. And to show you the power of trade, and to show you that trade is no different in any fundamental sense from innovation, technological innovation, finding cheaper ways to do things, right? What increasing your standard of living is finding ways to get more from less. I want to be able to be more productive. I want to use fewer workers, fewer resources, and get more output. That's called productivity, an increase in productivity. Technological change does that, right? Technological change says, oh, I figured out a new process that allows the worker to be more productive. Trade does the exact same thing, and I'll show it to you very easily by making the point that if that pill was not made by an American and not made by an Israeli, but was created by a Mexican, and I had to import the pill and pay the $10 in the equivalent in pesos, would it change anything in the story I just told you? And the answer is absolutely not. Nothing about that story is different. If instead of an American or an Israeli, one of, quote, us, inventing the pill, it was one of them, a foreigner, an outsider, what would the impact be? We'd live to 120, doctors would be unemployed, we'd have a wonderful life now, for most of us who weren't in the healthcare field, we'd have a lot more money to spend on other things. That money to spend would increase the opportunities of the rest of the economy. The only difference is who collects the $10 per pill. It goes to a person with a different kind of name maybe than mine. No difference. The economics of trade and innovation, trade and technological change, the economics are exactly the same. It's finding a way to do more with less, to make our productivity higher, to increase our standard of living. So that's a story that's fictional. So let me tell you one more point. The shorter the transition, the harder it is to adjust. We understand that, right? If that pill was only available for a few people, it was hard to make. It's only a few lucky thousand or a few lucky million could take it. The transition for the doctors would be very different, right? I made it overly dramatic. I said it's overnight. When it's overnight, millions of people are looking down thinking, oh no, what do I do now? If it takes place over a year, over 10 years, over a generation, it's totally different. So the example I like to use that, so here's a real world example of that. In 1900 in America, 40% of the workforce was in agriculture, growing the food of America. Anybody know what the number is now, roughly? 2%. 2, maybe 3, 1.5, I don't know the exact number. It's less than 3. That's an incredible transformation over the last 117 years. Imagine going to a farmer in 1900 and saying, tell me what you think of this. We're going to, in about 100 years or so, only about 2% of the American people are going to be farming. What do you think? What would the prediction of the farmer be? Well, let's see. Starvation. Obviously not going to have enough food to eat. Riots, because what are those farmers going to do? They're going to be millions of people who aren't going to have any work, right? And probably civil war. I mean, not civil war is not the right, I don't know what you want to call it. The breakdown of society. I mean, it's going to be horrible. And then you'd say, well, let me show you your great-granddaughter and what her life is like. Take her to the buffet to start with, right? Nobody's starving. In fact, we have an obesity problem in the United States, right? Because food's too cheap. The number of jobs somehow kept increasing steadily during this time while we were losing jobs in agriculture. Well, what could they possibly work on? Well, they could be car manufacturers. Well, what's a car? Well, they could be airplane manufacturers. Well, what's an airplane? They could be web designers. Oh, like spiders? They could work on the iPhone. I mean, think about how mind-boggling that transformational life is for that 1900 farmer who gets to travel in time to see what his great-granddaughter's life is like on a day-to-day basis. Now, some farmers always dreamed that their kids would get their farm. That dream's not coming true. Almost everyone's dream like that didn't come true. So what actually happened, because it didn't take place overnight, because we got the equivalent almost of free food for $10. I mean, that's the transformation we're talking about, that it's like this magic medical pill, right? What happened over this last 100 years, and most of it took place really between 1900 and 1960 or so, is that we figured out new ways for agriculture to be more productive using machinery, right? We found as a result of that to be efficient, to be competitive in the marketplace, farms got bigger. And as they got bigger, the price of food, they took advantage of economies of scale, and the price of food fell. And as a result, a person who didn't get a bigger farm, who kept the farm they always had, what did they find? Couldn't make their mortgage payments. Do you understand what happened? The benefit to the consumer of the cheaper food was a penalty to the farmer, just like the healthcare pill. They couldn't keep the promises they had made to their lenders, and they had to lose their farm or sell it to someone else who was happy to have it because a bigger farm actually was going to work when a small one wouldn't. And again, that dream of passing on your farm to your kids had to be given up, very tragically, for a lot of people. Not only did they not fulfill that dream, but their standard of living fell a lot because they used to be very successful farmers, and as prices fell, guess what? Their standard of living started to fall, again, somewhat like the medical doctors, but not as dramatically. And most of them did what? They had to stop being farmers. They had to leave agriculture. And certainly their kids, who also may have had a dream, when I get older, I'm going to work the land like my parents, their kids had to find some other alternative. But what are they going to do when the workforce is flooded with 40% almost of the American workforce year after year who now can't be farmers? And the answer is something else. And what was it? Oh, the myriad of amazing products that have come into the United States and in the modern world since 1900. Things they couldn't have dreamed of in 1900, things that would have been comforting if they could have seen them, but they couldn't see them, so they were scared and uneasy and anxious. But those things did come along, and the great-grandchildren of those farmers not only have, by the way, a great life, most of them, they don't have to get up at 5 in the morning to slop the hogs. I don't know what slopping the hogs is. I think it means feeding them, but it's an unpleasant thing. Farming is dangerous. People die on farms from accidents. That stopped happening. They get to work at a nice air-conditioned office. Never forget the time my oldest son, when he was about 4 years old, had a disease. I heard about the name of it from another economist named John Bodden. He called it ironitis. Ironitis is the love of anything made out of metal. So my son loved any machinery, any tractor, any backhoe, any construction equipment. And if there was somebody building something in our neighborhood, my son, who was 4 or 5, would just stand and watch it. And one day, the operator of this, you know what a backhoe is? It's that thing with the big claw, the huge thing that digs up the earth. It's also sometimes a little version is called a bobcat, which is the brand name of the little thing. And one of the workers saw that my son was fascinated and let him sit in the cab and pretend to use the levers, which was like the high point of his life. Maybe still. I don't know if it's ever gotten any better than that. And then he put him down on the sidewalk and he said, "Do you like this truck?" "Yeah." Did you enjoy that?" "Oh, that was," he loved he could barely talk. He was so happy. And then he looked down in my son's face and he said, "Let me tell you something, kid. Stay in school so you don't have to drive one of these, so you can work in a nice office and have a better life than I have." That was a heartbreaking thing, right? I don't know what my son thought. I was like, It wasn't quite what he bargained for in the exchange. But again, it's seriously true. I mean, a farming life, there's something romantic about it. There's something beautiful about it. There's something good about being close to the food and the land and the animals and the vegetation. But it's very hard work, and it's dangerous. And there's something really wonderful, I think, about the fact that we don't have to do that anymore, just like we don't have to work so much in the coal mines, which is also incredibly dangerous. And so manufacturing in general, which has shrunk in the United States, I'm going to talk about why in a minute, but it's not easy work. It can sometimes be boring, and it's dangerous. So life has gotten not just more entertaining because of the iPhone, the smartphone, the special, incredible advances we made in health that were possible because we didn't have to devote so much money to farming and feeding ourselves. Not only do that, we live longer and we live safer lives. So I don't think the farmer of 1900 brought into the future would say, how could we have let this happen? I think they would say, this is one of the most greatest miracles I couldn't have imagined. This is wonderful. So that's farming. That turned out pretty well for the United States. Turned out pretty well for the farmer, even the farmer who had to sell his farm because it was going into bankruptcy, because that farmer probably cares to know, if farmer could know, about the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren and the life that they had. I've got to tell you one more quick story about farming before we leave it. I for a while, was very interested in eggs. A chicken is a very simple production process. All right? You throw out some food, and I don't know how long it takes, but at some point in the future, the chicken lays an egg. That's the production process. You feed the chicken, it lays an egg. So how much better could it be? How could you improve that? Well, you could maybe keep the chickens healthier. You can think about various things you could do. It turns out, even today, a chicken in the third world, in the poorest parts of the world, lays about 50 eggs a year. An egg a week. An American chicken, about an egg a day. American chicken is about 7 times more productive than a chicken of the past or a chicken now in a not-so-hot part of the world, a poor part of the world. Now, let me be honest with you. And the reason that's true, by the way, is you don't just, in the old days, you had a bunch of chickens in the backyard, you threw out the seed, then you wandered around and see if anybody laid an egg overnight, and you collected them. Today, a zillion chickens live in an incredibly sophisticated, computerized building. There's 2 people who work in the building. I always ruin this joke, but the gist of it is, in a modern factory, there's usually only 1 employee and a dog. The employee's job is to make sure that it's running, is to make sure that the switches are all in the right setting, and the dog's job is to keep the worker from touching the switches. You know, the person doesn't do anything in the factory, almost nothing. It's all computerized, mechanized. So nobody throws out the food. It's all computerized. The chickens get a very sophisticated, they don't get a little corn, they get a sophisticated mix of antibiotics and all kinds of other stuff. It used to be chickens wore contact lenses. I love this. I don't think they do it anymore, but they used to wear contact lenses which changed the color of their eyes and what they saw so they wouldn't fight as much. Who knows if it's true? I think it's true. Nobody picks up the eggs. They're all when the eggs are laid, they go on a conveyor belt. They're pushed into the crates and the cartons, and it's all incredibly well done. And as a result, the amount of time that the average person has to work to earn a dozen eggs has fallen steadily over the last 100 years. Very important point. I once asked a veteran of the egg industry a bunch of questions to find out what had changed. He said the coops, the areas where the chickens live, have gotten much bigger. And he said, but you know what the problem with our industry is? I said, no, what's that? He said, too many eggs. Ruins it for everybody. The prices are too low. I said, yeah, good for us. Tough for you. So the gains from that mechanization, all that technological improvement, all that productivity, mainly got passed on to us. Chicken farmers didn't get wealthier. They had to adopt all those innovations if they wanted to stay in business, but competition among them delivered the gains to us. And we got cheap eggs as a result. Now, I have to say, not every chicken has a great life. They never go on a cruise. That's a joke. You could laugh. Maybe you don't know what a cruise is. They don't get to be on Facebook. It's a hard life being a chicken. So I don't want to, there's an animal cost to this transformation, which bothers a lot of people, and they're in favor of free-range chickens. And of course, I don't know what it's like here in Israel, but in America, where there's lots of competition, you can have any kind of egg you want. You can have a brown egg, you can have a white egg, you can have a free-range egg, meaning an egg raised by a chicken that looks like something out of The Sound of Music. You know, in The Sound of Music, Julie Andrews is going through the field singing. And that's, for some chickens, that's their life in a free-range system, except for the fact that free-range chickens get a lot of diseases and get eaten by coyotes. It's not as romantic as you might think. It's not Julie Andrews and Sound of Music. It's a lot of fear and anxiety because they're afraid of being eaten, I think, a lot. But it's a more natural life, so I'm not going to judge anyone who wants an more expensive, still pretty cheap, more expensive egg where the chicken is raised in less confined quarters. Because in the cheap egg world, the chickens they have a very unpleasant life. I just don't know what a chicken senses, right? A chicken has a small brain, but for all I know, it's miserable. And so if you feel bad about that, you can buy free-range eggs, and they're a little more expensive, okay? The point I want to make is that this transformation of agriculture in the United States, what drove it? Technological change like the ability to house 1 million chickens in one building with computerized feeding and collecting of eggs. Would the story have been any different if we instead had been able to import cheap eggs from Canada? No different. Except for one thing I'll tell you in a sec. But basically, if we import cheap eggs from Canada, what happens? I don't have to pay as much for eggs. I have more money to spend on other things. Farmers who make eggs now are going to have to find new things to do. There aren't going to be room for as many farmers as there were before, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we import cheap food, inexpensive food. There's almost no difference between that and finding better ways to produce food so they don't take as much resources. That's the key. It doesn't take as much resource. You don't have to spend as much money. You don't have to give up as much stuff to get the stuff you want. Trade does that. So does technology. They do the same thing. The one difference is that Canada, in theory, could say, now that you're importing all that food from us, we hate you and we're not going to sell it to you anymore, and we starve to death. Whereas if it's technology, you've got the cheaper food all the time. So it is not a good idea. I don't think that's really in the Canadian psyche. But it's not a good idea to import stuff that's life-sustaining from one country who might be your enemy. That's probably not a good idea. But other than that risk, which is quite small, I can't think of an historical example where that was important. I can think of one, actually. The only one example I can think of that was important is Japan before World War II decided it was too dependent on United States oil. The United States was a possible enemy, and so they decided to invade a bunch of countries to get some of their own oil, and that was a bad thing. Okay, but in general, importing oil, importing other things is not so dangerous, and it works the same way for the economy as innovation. Which now brings us to the present. It brings us to trade with China and Mexico. Now, I would argue that in the United States, the ability and opportunity to buy things from China, and I assume it's true here too, increasing based on the question from last night, the ability to import things from China or other countries enriches the lives of the people here, unless they're in direct competition, in which case it's not so pleasant, right? So if we allowed in Israel the importing of more food, most of us would benefit tremendously from it, but the people who make the honey or the people who grow the eggs, and eggs is a problem here as far as I understand it in Israel. I think we have an egg cartel, and there's limits or maybe no opportunity to import eggs, so eggs are much more expensive, I would guess, here than they are in the United States or in other countries. But if we broke that down, that would benefit the hungrier and poorer people of Israel as well as the wealthier and more comfortable people. And it would be very hard on one piece of Israeli society, which are the people who are currently in the egg business. And how you feel about that might depend on how easy it is for those people to find other things to do, and maybe that's not so easy. Maybe a lot of those people will struggle. And I'm going to suggest that's a possibility in the United States. So here are the data. In 1960, 24% of U.S. jobs in 1960 were manufacturing jobs. It's 8% now. So that's a transformation, something like the agricultural change. That's a big, big change. That's a threefold drop. That's you move to a third of what it was before in about a half a century. Since 2000, which is only 17 years, probably 15 years of the data I'm looking at, 30% reduction in manufacturing employment. A lot of that is from China, but a lot of it's also from the application of computers and mechanization to the manufacturing process. So two things are happening in the world right now, every second. Manufacturing is moving to places where wages are lower, assuming that people can do the jobs as well as the other people who did them before. And the productivity of those workers is going crazy up because of the opportunity to use technology. So the incredible fact is, even though the US has a fraction of the number of manufacturing workers today that it had in 1960, it produces a lot more stuff. It's unbelievable. It's hard to count that, but count as best we can. The United States manufacturing output, not employment, output is much greater than it was in 1970, and at the same time, employment is much lower. So one of the two reasons employment is lower is you don't need as many workers because of productivity to make the amount of stuff we still make. And the other reason is we don't make everything that we used to make. We've sent a bunch of it overseas, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, et cetera. So here's the crazy thing. Since 2000, manufacturing is down 30%. We've lost that's 5 million jobs. So think about that. It's a big economy, but 5 million is a big number, even in a big economy. The United States since 2000 has lost 5 million manufacturing jobs. But the total number of jobs is up 12 million. So we did find other things to do. The opportunities did expand. There is more stuff available for workers. But I bet it's the case that some of those 5 million didn't find those 12 million. Some of those 12 million new jobs went to new workers. They went to people who hadn't worked before. They went to workers who had just left college. Some of those 5 million manufacturing workers have struggled to find anything productive to do. So when NAFTA was being debated, I was living in St. Louis, and I made the mistake of agreeing to debate NAFTA in the south side of St. Louis, which happens to be where the auto manufacturing employment is in St. Louis. And I went at the debate not knowing. I knew that was a possibility, but I didn't realize that every single person in the audience hated my guts and was probably either a coworker or relative of the person I was debating. So it's a character building experience. And in the question, and it was really quite a brutal debate with lots of accusations and maybe some exaggerations, and it was tough. But in the question and answer part, a guy raised his hand who did turn out to be the brother of the guy I was debating. By the way, just to make it clear, there were about 70 people there. So it wasn't like there were 4 people all from this guy's family. There were about 70 people from this guy's family, cousins, brother. And so the brother says to me, he says, I'm a machinist. And as you know, probably in the United States, starting around 1980, the United States started importing a great deal of Japanese cars. And as a result of that, a bunch of things were set in motion. Think about what those were. Well, let's see. Cars got cheaper in real terms. They got a lot better because the American manufacturers who had been kind of loafing along suddenly realized that they were about to lose their business, and they worked a lot harder, and they made their cars a lot better. But to do that, employment had to shrink a lot, and there was productivity, huge increases in productivity, application of machinery, robots, et cetera, to make the manufacturing process more efficient so they could have lower prices and compete with the Japanese cars, right? So the American manufacturing sector in automobiles and cars shrunk dramatically between 1980 and today. I don't remember the numbers now, but General Motors used to employ maybe 750,000 people, 750,000. Now they probably have 100,000. I don't know the numbers, but it's a fraction of what, I don't remember them, it's a fraction of what they once had. This guy, we had a Chrysler factory in St. Louis, American car. He said, I'm a machinist. Anybody know what a machinist is? I don't know what, it's probably the same word, B-breed. It means you, what? Mechonait. It's somebody who stamps metal, who makes things out of metal with big equipment. He said, I'm a and it's a skilled job. It's not a, there's I think quite a bit of skill to it. He said, I'm a machinist. I've been out of work for 5 years. He said, what are you going to do for me? So I want you to think about that for a minute. What do you think I could have said to this person who is in pain? I mean, it's not like, oh, I wish so, you know, this person has no income, no pride, right? No satisfaction from taking care of himself and his family. He's very unhappy, and I don't blame him. What I wanted to say was, don't worry, your grandchildren are going to have a much better life because we've let Japanese cars into the United States. But I decided that was not the right thing to say, right? I think it's true, but it's not the right comfort at that point in this person's life. So I was really kind of desperate, and I said, well, what do you want me to do? You know, what you know, you're suffering. He's saying, I'm out of work. He's suggesting it's the fault of people like me who want to let in Japanese cars. I said, what do you want? I said, you want a check? Because I can get you a check. We could have a welfare program, right, to pay people who've lost their jobs to, and we do. We have a program in America called Trade Adjustment Assistance that gives money to people who've lost their jobs to foreign trade. For reasons I don't understand, it doesn't affect many people. Not many people collect it. I don't know whether that's the way the program's designed, whether people don't know about it, whether it's hard to qualify. But basically, I said, you know, I was saying to him, would you like us to create a better welfare program to pay you? And he, of course, what do you think he said? Nobody says, yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to go on welfare. No, he said something very simple. He said, I want my job back, which I get, right? I said, well, I can get your job back pretty easily. What would I do? Those are good answers. It reminds me of when I once had to give a presentation on CAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Agreement, which is a trade agreement between the United States and a bunch of countries in Central America: Guatemala, Dominican Republic, Haiti. And does anybody here follow American baseball? Probably not, but does anyone here follow it? Okay, we got a half a vote here, a small hand. Well, American baseball, over the last 25 years, has had an enormous infusion of talent from the Dominican Republic. Some of the best players of the last 25 years, and they actually come from one city in the Dominican Republic. It's a crazy, beautiful thing. These people live in terrible poverty, and they come to the United States and they make millions of dollars. And they take a bunch of it home. They transform their families' lives. So before the presentation, I said to my son, I said, do you think it's fair that Dominican baseball players come to the United States and take jobs away from American baseball players? And of course, baseball's got a fixed number of teams and a fixed number of players per team. So it's literally true that if more Dominican Republic players come in, there are fewer jobs for Americans. And I said, do you think that's fair that they come? And he said, of course. And I said, but they're taking away jobs from Americans. And he said, well, the Americans need to try harder, which is what somebody said here about being innovative. And I said, but what if after they try harder, they can't do it? They're not as good. He said, well, it means you're not going to let in the people to play who are better? And of course, my answer is not only is that seems like the right thing to do, but those people who are coming from the Dominican Republic are really desperately poor. And what their next best alternative is could be death, literally starvation. And you're going to keep them out to keep the standard of living in America. So I'm going to tell this machinist in St. Louis, oh, yeah, let's keep out the Japanese cars, because that would do it, right? That would do it. I can get him his job back. I just need to put a miksa, is that the right word? A quota on Japanese cars, or a tariff, a meches. I could make them more expensive for American consumers, and that would increase the demand for his skills, and his factory would hire more workers. The problem with that is, that's the same as a check. that he doesn't want. That's cheating, right? The only way I can help him get his job back is to tell a bunch of Americans, you can't buy what you want. In fact, I'm going to force you to pay a premium for your car because I'm not going to let in these cars. But don't worry, the premium is going to go partially to help this unemployed machinist. So it's like a check, but he won't see it, that it's a check. He'll feel good. He'll have his job back. He'll have his pride. He'll be happy. But I've really forced a bunch of us to send him money. Now, you might say that's a good deal. You might say it's worth it. Pay a little more for a car, keep that person employed. It does mean, though, that all the benefits that come from less expensive cars, all the new things that could come along, the new opportunities for that man's child, that man's grandchild, aren't going to be there. And once we say that we're going to preserve the current distribution of employment, we start ending the natural human urge to change the world. And instead of trying to change the world, I'm going to try to change Washington. I'm going to go to the Congress and try to get them to keep my wage high instead of trying to do my job better. That's the deal. That's the trade-off. Now, having said all that, there's a lot of stuff happening right now that China, I think, is only the smallest part of. So I've mentioned it a couple times. I'll mention it again. We get driverless cars, driverless trucks. There's millions of people who are not going to have work. Are they going to find things to do? Should we stop driverless cars? Should we stop clean coal? So that clean coal comes from out west of the United States. Fracking, the shale revolution we've talked about in a couple other sessions. Those have all helped ruin the lives of those coal miners in West Virginia. Should we have not let that happen? I don't think that's the world most of us want to live in. I don't think most of us want to live in a static world where we preserve the goodies that people already have and give up the potential for future transformation, whether it's in health, entertainment, and other things. The problem is it's not obvious that in a world of robots and artificial intelligence that there may be a lot of people like that machinist. And I do think a lot of us get our satisfaction in life from our work. Yes, from other things, right? For some of us it's religion, for some of us it's art, for some of us it's music. But work is still important to a lot of us. I suspect we'll have some kind of cultural transformation that maybe changes the way we feel about our work, if indeed artificial intelligence can transform the workplace. But it's just going to be an interesting challenge of what's going to happen as that transformation takes place, because it won't be immediate adjustment for everyone all the time. It seems to me that the short-run solution, which is not really short run, but at least for now, the thing we ought to be working on, is our education system. Our education system does not prepare people for a world of artificial intelligence. It doesn't prepare people for a world of robots. It mainly prepares people for taking exams. And taking exams is really not the most useful skill in the world. So in the United States, I don't know how it is in Israel, I suspect it's maybe even worse with the Bagrut, but in Israel, in the United States, the entire focus of American high school students is SATs, ACTs, get into a good college. Now, it's a good idea to go to college, usually, not for everybody, but it's not a bad thing. But the question of what you study is what's important. And then the question is for the people who don't go to college, who in the old days would work at a factory, but that factory is pretty much gone now. In the old days would, like today, might drive a cab or drive a truck, but they might disappear. What are we keeping kids in school for till the age of 18, and what are we offering them? And I think the answer is, I'll give you a sec, I think what we need to offer them is something radically different than what we have now, not the kind of mindless, boring, useless debates we have in the United States over things like the curriculum, that whether all students should have the same curriculum or not. We need to be trying some really radical, different ways to prepare people to work in a world of information. Whether that's teaching them how to code the way we teach them now algebra, right? Whether coding, that is programming, what is it, Beavereed? Technut? Technut. So Technut is writing computer, like an app, coding. So whether it's that, whether that should be required, maybe it should be heavily required, we don't know. No one knows. But we need a lot of experimentation, and we certainly need, in my opinion, in the United States, and my guess is here, to introduce a lot more energy, meaning enthusiasm and creativity, into the school system to try some new things. That's going to require competition. Finland is doing a little bit. Finland is, what? Are they? Yeah, but they have other problems because Asia is really good at certain things, but if those things turn out to be the wrong things, they're not going to be in the same boat as everyone else. Finland did very well for a while. Lately, Finland has fallen in the rankings. I don't know if you've looked. My youngest son did a paper recently on the Finnish. No, not him. That's the middle son. He's the guy worried about the Dominican Republic people. God bless him. Proud of him. But my youngest son just did a paper on the Finnish education system. It's not obvious that it would work the way that it would transport well outside of Finland, but certainly we should look at all around the world and look for creative ideas that might do better. So I'm going to stop here and open it up for questions. Yeah, Alice first.
I'm going to take it to the extreme. Let's say that you allow Japanese cars to come to the United States, and then the machinists lose their jobs. But not only that, you allow everything.
Which we pretty much do in the United States, by the way.
But I'm going to now accelerate the rate of change. Okay, so everyone may, let's say Israel, not the United States. Israel is a small country. Let's say the rate of change is so high that even the high tech cannot keep up, and it all moves to India.
Could happen.
It could happen like in 20 years.
Yeah,
it's
or
possible.
Yeah.
And everyone, including the more talented and more adaptive part of society, start losing their jobs.
Yep.
Okay, because the rate of change is too high, and humans cannot adapt so fast. So do you have?
So that's the worry. Well, the worry is not India. The worry really is that artificial intelligence will make almost every job obsolete. I think that's false, by the way. I think there are a lot of things that humans are going to be able to do that robots can't do. But it could be that it's a very short list. And it could be that we can't do those things that much better than robots. And, you know, for example I heard someone give once is like, so my wife likes to get a manicure. I won't ask for a show of hands, but I'm sure some of you have either had a manicure or get one regularly. So my wife likes a regular manicure. In our area, it's very inexpensive, and it's all done, this is coincidental, it's not the point of the story, it's done by people who are not Native Americans born in the United States. They're immigrants, and so they talk often among themselves in their language. It's often Vietnamese. But they also interact with my wife. They talk about their school. A lot of them are part-time in school, and my wife likes the whole process. She likes the manicure. She likes interacting with the workers. Now suppose, and I don't know how much it is. It turns out it's $500, but it's worth it. No, it's inexpensive. I don't know how much. Now suppose there's a new thing that for half the price, you just put your hands in a device, and after 15 seconds, you pull them out, and they look better than when a human does it, right? Would you go to that device? Would you use that? Well, some people would, because it's half the price. But for other people, they're never going to go there. They would rather have the human contact. You know, I have the equivalent of that with my haircut. Our hair cutter, it's a 12-minute haircut. It's like a machine. It's like computerized. It's a pretty good haircut. It's $17. And it takes 12 minutes. It's I used to get the pampered fancy kind where they wash your hair and give you a little shampoo and massage. This is like, in and I'm done. This is great. Well, there are going to be people who always want the human contact, right? They want to know their grocer. They want to go to the farm and meet the people who grew the food. But that's a luxury. That's a fancy thing to do. Now, if robots really come and can do all the jobs, there's a very strange, paradoxical thing that's going to happen. I know. We'll come back to the question in a second. Actually, I do think it's the question, but let me finish my answer to the question you didn't ask, and then you tell me why it's not the answer. So if robots can do everything, everything's going to get very inexpensive, right? So you don't have to have a lot of income to live well. The problem is, are you going to be happy in a world where a bunch of people, it's like food. Food in America is so inexpensive that nobody goes hungry, literally hungry, right? But what if you don't have much of a job? So you got lots of stuff. It's kind of like getting the check, right? You don't have to work many hours. Maybe you'll go down to the mechanical manicure place and like you'll sit in the driverless car and chat with the customer who likes human contact. You won't do anything to the car. You're just going to be the pretend driver. Maybe you'll do this with your hands. Hey, how you doing back there? You know, maybe people will pay a premium for that. And that little amount of money, because you're not going to pay a lot for it, but that little amount of money will go so far. But is that going to be a satisfying life? I don't know. So I'm kind of uneasy about that. So you're saying that's not your question, but it kind of is your question, because if people in Israel can't make stuff because people in India can do it so much cheaper, it's true that in the short run that's going to be very unpleasant for the high-tech sector of the Israeli economy. But if India is so good at it, the equivalent of again, trade and innovation are almost the same thing. If we could find robots that could write code, and of course some people think we're heading that way, they'll do it even cheaper than the Indians because you don't have to pay them anything. What? What's the question?
I'm saying, if it's just the high tech, Israel will manage.
Right.
Okay, but if it's many sectors,
I think it's going to be everything. Yeah.
Because if it's called the taxi drivers and the bus drivers, that's some percentage of. But if everything goes simultaneously, then the recovery might be problematic. Like finding other jobs or alternative occupation.
I think it goes the other way, actually. I think when every job becomes possible to be done by someone else, either by the machines or by foreigners because they can do it so much cheaper, which is why you picked India, right? Then all of a sudden, all the things that we buy, unless you mess up your economy, which you could, of course, but all the things you buy are going to be incredibly inexpensive, and you're not going to have to work very hard to earn the lots of stuff. My point is that that's maybe not so appealing. Maybe that's not so pleasant. You're thinking, oh my gosh, no one's going to have anything to do. My thought is if no one has anything to do, that means that there's so much stuff coming that's so inexpensive, they don't have to do very much. So that's the flip side of the problem. I'm suggesting it's a cultural problem more than a financial goods problem. I think as our society moves to a world where things get, I mean, think about it this way. Think about how many things you enjoy right now that cost almost nothing. Think about the hours of pleasure you get from your phone. Now, the phone's expensive. The phone's not cheap. It'll get cheaper, and a lot of that expense is, I think, due to the way the phone system works, and that'll change. But right now, it's a little bit expensive to buy a phone. What's coming, think about what you do on the phone once you've bought the phone, right? Most of what you love, or are addicted to, depending on how you want to phrase it, costs you very little out of pocket. If I want to go to a movie in America today, what's the cost here to go to the cinema? How many shekels?
40 shekels.
40? 50, 40, that's about what it is in the United States. So that's almost the same.
10 minutes.
What?
10 minutes.
What's 10 minutes?
Of downloading.
Oh, yeah. Well, some people steal it and some people buy it. But if you want to sit in the theater with a big screen and you want to have a comfortable chair and a place to put your drink and whatever, you know, the new theaters in America are really crazy and strange. They recline. It's bizarre. They're going to be giving you massages next, and then you'll have, you know, you'll be listening in special sound, and then it'll be three-dimensional all the time, and then it'll smell, and who knows what it'll be. But think about so $15 for that experience versus close to zero because you can get, it's not as good, it's a smaller screen, et cetera, but the amount of, some of that's legal, right? Right, and some of it's is legal but not free, like Netflix. I don't know what Netflix costs here, but Netflix, I get a lot of bang for my buck. I get a lot of entertainment compared to, say, in the past. So I think the world is moving toward what I would call where's my friend? Shefa. Who told me about Shefa? Shefa. Right. So Shefa, lots of stuff. And a lot of us will be able to buy it. But I don't know, maybe we won't be so happy. I worry a lot about that. Yeah. You don't worry about that. You think we'll be fine.
People will be creative, and I don't think it's a problem. The problem is if everyone loses their jobs in the same year. That's the problem.
Yeah, well, yeah, fair enough. And I also think it's a generational issue. You live in a different generation than I do, and your tastes and, some of us talked about this before, your view of privacy, your view of lots and lots of things is so different from people who lived in a world pre-internet. It's just a totally different set of expectations about life. Oh.
Okay, so I will try to attack Alexander's
Optimism.
position from a different angle.
Okay.
So what I think is that we saw that you talked about 3 different creative destruction processes, 2 that already happened and 1 that's future. The first was the agricultural, then was the manufacturing, and now there's the AI that's probably coming soon. So in everyone, the process is accelerating.
Yes, it is.
So
Seems to be.
Seems to be accelerating, right? So in agriculture, it took about 100 years, and that's also due to policy and subsidies to farmers and all kinds of reasons, but it took about 100 years. Manufacturing, for different reasons,
The last 15 have been very
shorter. And now with the AI, who knows? It could be much faster.
Yep.
And I think you maybe represented how tough it is. So you talked a little about how the shorter the transition is, the harder it is. Yeah. And you used words like hard and not fun and stressful,
tragic,
full of fear. But even if you took the slowest of those transitions, you looked at agriculture, people didn't just feel bad, people killed themselves.
Yep.
Most
of them didn't, though.
Most of them didn't, but there were many suicides. People's lives didn't ever improve. Some of them become depressed and stayed that way.
Yep.
So what I'm getting at is, I feel like when we hear economists talk about those kind of issues, they always understate the societal effects. And what I'm trying to get at is there any economic remedy to that? Maybe an economist's point of view that will help with the society that's being affected by the transition? And if not, how can we incorporate more solutions to that outside of the economic point of view?
Yeah, so I don't, I tried really hard not to understate it. But that machinist, I tried to make it as sad a story as I could. I could have told you he killed himself after I got a letter from his cousin, we shouldn't joke about it because I think right now, one of the most powerful books I've read in the last 10 years is a book called Dreamland. And it's the story of the opioid painkiller epidemic in the United States and how it interacts with the heroin epidemic in the United States. I don't really like the word epidemic, but it's the vastly increased use of addictive drugs to ease people's pain and boredom. And there's some speculation this is related to the loss of manufacturing and mining and other types of jobs in Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and and there are people, they're not literally committing suicide, but they are killing themselves through drug overdoses. And it's not a small thing. It's a big thing. It's 30,000 people, more than 30,000 people a year in the United States. So it's a terrible tragedy. Now, how much of that is despair over work versus subsidized drugs, which has been part of a policy failure, unintentional policy failure? How much of it is people's inability to move and look for new work? So I should have said this earlier, there's a big change in the United States. I don't know what the Israeli economy is like, but the United States, I really do believe it's gotten harder to find new work and people are less willing to move. Maybe we've subsidized staying in place. Maybe we've made it too hard for people to move. I don't know what it is. Maybe our character has changed as a nation. it's hard to know for sure. But what I want to emphasize is to try to answer your question about what can the solution part, which really I think is Tamar's question about West Virginia also. There's no easy answer. We want a magic answer. There's no attractive answer in the short run. The short run answers are all awful. Pay people to do nothing, which we do in the United States. And we've increased disability, which I think is partly, we have a program called disability insurance. If you hurt yourself on the job, you get a check from the government. Well, a lot more people are hurt on the job all of a sudden, and yet the workplace is safer. So what's going on? And we've basically liberalized the rules of how, of being on disability insurance. And there's been a large increase over the last 25, 30 years or so. And that's one way to cope with the problem. I think that's not a great way, but that is one way you cope. And now it's implicit. You can make it explicit. We could offer a guaranteed income, right? A lot of people are interested in that as a solution. No one should live on a standard of living less than X. What is X? Maybe it's $10,000, maybe it's $20,000. So how do you implement that? Some people say, give to everybody. Oh, wow, that's kind of strange. Why would I be getting $20,000? Well, the answer is, if you don't give it to everybody, you get the problem we were talking about at Lunch Grow Town, which is all of a sudden people who make $25,000 are thinking, I'm a sucker. Why should I make 25 and work all day when I can quit my job and make 20? Right? So if you have a hard rule about who gets how much, and above that you don't get anything, then you have a huge disincentive to work, which means the program is going to have very negative incentives on working. You could say that's a price worth paying. That could be okay. But that's one of the costs. So you can pay people money. You can artificially give them work. You can pay them to dig ditches and fill them in. Right? Dig holes, put the dirt back in the hole. Give them a check at the end of the day. You can give them the illusion of work. You can create government jobs for them that don't really do anything productive. It's not obvious. What? You already do that one, yeah. We do too. Every nation does it to some extent. So I think the only real by the way, let's be clear, since we've talked a lot starting on day one about things emerge that you don't anticipate, things get solved without top-down direct work, our culture will change, and it is changing already in terms of our attitudes about work. People are we don't have to figure out necessarily what to do for them. Some of them will, out of desperation, create new things, find new ways to do things. People will find ways to hire them and use them and employ them. But no matter what, nothing is perfect. So there will be a bunch of people who are going to suffer, just like they have for all of human history. So if you're looking for a policy change that will get rid of suffering, you're dangerous. That's what you are. You're a dangerous person. So it's always a question of trade-offs. I haven't used this phrase yet. It's one of my favorite phrases in economics. Economics, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. So there's different choices, and in those choices, some are better than others, some help some but hurt others. There's nothing that's perfect. But I would say the closest thing to a real free lunch, the closest thing to a solution that doesn't have painful side costs for society, it's not free, is education, right? So if you can figure out the educational changes, and my suggestion, of course, is that no one can figure that out. We need a process to figure that out. That's why I think we need to liberate this educational system, certainly in the United States, certainly in Israel, where we have so many gifted people, to allow those gifts to flourish and to allow the people, as what I talked about last night, you guys are going to be, most of you are going to be fine. I don't think you're going to be put out of work by Indian programmers or Chinese programmers. I think you're going to thrive and flourish. I'm more worried about the people who drop out of school in 10th grade and don't have a marketable skill to be part of this economy that's coming that mostly will be very pleasant. It may be a little bit less exciting, but it'll be exciting in other ways. Question?
Yes. By the way, the young people don't anymore want to sit in the air-conditioned office. They want something more cool.
They want something what?
Now they want something new.
Yeah, true. It's true.
Economy, so
That's not the dream anymore, right?
Yeah. They want
Good point.
Creative hub and
They want what?
creative hubs and
Nice ethnic restaurants and lots of bars, and ping pong tables where they work, and free breakfast. Yeah.
But that's not the point.
Okay, go ahead.
So you mentioned a lot the individual level and the national level global level, and I missed the kind of local and more regional level. And in my studies of development, we talked about something called the leaking buckets theory. And basically what it says is, if we take a poor place, like the Negev in Israel, the south, and or like a specific city, let's say a specific poor city in the southern area of Israel, then what happens usually, if there is a bucket, the government can put money inside, or donors, or whatever, but money does not stay there, because it's not competitive enough, right? They will always take engineers from Tel Aviv and everything from Tel Aviv. So the point is, unless they spend money on the existing forces, and unless they don't import, the place cannot get more innovative and better, because the infrastructure is going to say worse, the education system, etc. And poor people will stay there, skilled one will go away. So how do you solve this issue?
So the leaky bucket problem, you told the most attractive version of it. The least attractive version is you send the money and the leaders just keep it, which is what happens overseas, right? The Western world has spent a lot of money trying to alleviate poverty in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, and those efforts were usually not successful. They made the leaders rich, but not the people. It's not a joke, but it sounds like a joke. The best thing you can do for poor people is to give them luggage, suitcases, things to get out of town. It could be that Beersheba, the region, not Beersheba itself, I don't know how Beersheba is doing, but the towns that you're talking about, what? Yeah, Beersheba I heard great things about, and I thought it was a cheap shot last night. There was like some kind of anti-non-center of Israel implication there, I thought. Ha! But anyway, it could be that I know there are certain parts of the world that are not going to be productive, and the people there will be more productive if they live somewhere else, and for reasons that are not obvious, they don't move. Now, one of the reasons they don't move, it's not because they don't have the suitcases. They don't move because they're comfortable with their life. They don't like the job part of it, but they like the cultural part. They like the village that they grew up in, or whatever it is, the language that they're used to. But the other problem, of course, is that to move to the place where the better jobs are, is suddenly very expensive. So Tel Aviv is very expensive. New York City is very expensive. San Francisco is very expensive. Palo Alto is very expensive. And that, tragically, to me, is a zoning and policy failure on the part of local places to keep out people who weren't there already, and to make the rent and the home value of the places that are there higher than it otherwise would be. And I think it's immoral. I understand it's natural that they want to preserve their high values of housing, but I think it's wrong. And I think it's terrible. But the other point to make, which I think is the relevant point to the local issue, is local education. Education is best designed locally for the skills of the people who are there, which are very different than the skills of the people somewhere else. And to say impose a national curriculum or a national school system is increasingly a mistake and not helpful to those people who are desperately need to get out, lead better lives, have different skills. Yeah.
I want to keep with the social questions. I'm missing a piece in the puzzle, a perspective, and you might say that it's a different seminar, but for me it's like inevitable.
Always a good strategy when you get a tough question. I wish we had time. Oh, we only have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
For me it's inevitable it's a word I can't pronounce because I only read it. Inevitable?
Inevitable. Inevitable. Put the emphasis on the L. It's inevitable. Yeah.
Inevitable.
Which means you can't stop it.
By taking this free market and everything we said.
Okay.
And it's community resilience. And my perspective, and this is why I want to ask you for your opinion, is that community resilience in time of crisis only can merge while interaction between the people in the community interact. and the interaction can be good or bad. I mean, it can be while standing in line to the coffee shop, while doing your nails, while waiting in the grocery store.
Yep.
So many things. But for what I understood from your talk is that community will mainly be by interest-based. I mean, to be religion, music, and same group. And for me, this niche of only religion kind of distort us from our geographic community. I mean, the technology will take its part, but there is, I mean, you talked about tribal feeling, and there's a lot of bad things about it, but there's also good. And the good thing about it and is like being ill for something, and the neighbor of your neighbor, which you met once in line, was a doctor that is good. And I'm saying it because I was a social work for a year in a home hospice. Home hospice meaning taking a taboo back into the community. And the only, like one of the main things that kept my patients more happy, and happiness is also a goal in life,
No doubt.
was all the interaction they gained throughout the years from the community, from the grocery shop owner, and from the library person. So you can say like each person can read these like things from Kindle. You call it your technology.
Yeah.
So you can read it from Kindle, and you can order your groceries online, and you can do anything online. But then you live parallel lives, and you don't interact from your community. And in the time of crisis, and especially in Israel, when crises keep going all the time, I think a geographic community has a value, and this value is something we should work on. And it's not just interest value; it's like geographic, and it can be in Beersheba, in the toughest places and the richest places. Because when there is a security crisis, we're all put together, and it doesn't matter how much money you have in your pocket and what's your religion, and so on and so forth. So I'll just finish with what's your opinion.
So when it's just a statement and not a question, what you can kind of do is on the last part, just have your voice kind of go up a little bit to make it sound like a question, right? So you neglected that. Go ahead.
And where society and community resilience take place in free markets.
Okay, so here's the problem. You left me a minute and a half. I have 90 seconds. But it was a great question, really a great statement about another aspect of life, right, which is the face-to-face part. So we have moved, not through policy, not through a culture, a plan that anybody had. We've moved to a world where there's less geographic connection. Now, if you're Shomer Shabbat, you're automatically part of a geographical community. It's one of the best things about it, okay? So I treasure that. It's precious to me. Most people, doesn't appeal to them, right? So I have it in my life. It's special, but I understand that for most people it's not interesting, and they don't have an alternative way to do that because they're on their phone, they're on their Kindle, they're ordering their groceries from a distance. We are less connected face-to-face with each other. Now, I think there possibly will be a cultural swing back against that. There are people who are keeping Shabbat with their devices. They're deciding they're not going to check their phone for a day, right? So there's some awareness that maybe this is not a good thing, this living on our own in our parallel worlds in virtual reality. But I'm not sure. I'm very uneasy about it. It also depends on the homogeneity of your society. So Finland is just like a giant city of Finns, right? Israel, which has a lot of incredible national identity compared to the United States, is an incredibly diverse country, though, despite the fact that it is small, right? It's emotionally diverse. It's ethnically diverse. Religiously, not so much, a little bit, right? But not so much. So all these things are going on at the same time, and in the United States, as we move from...
Russ, sorry. It is extremely diverse also religiously.
With what?
It is extremely diverse also religiously.
What is?
Israel.
Diverse?
Religiously.
Yeah, no, I said it was. I agree.
No, I thought you said it wasn't. Sorry.
Well, on one dimension, it's not. There's a lot of Jews here, but there's not just Jews, right? There are other groups, and there's diversity within the Jewish part of it, obviously. But what's happened in the United States is that a lot of people moved into the creative hubs, into the cities. They have little pockets of friends, but they don't shop at the same. They're sort of friends with the barista at the coffee shop a little bit. They like the smiling face, but they'd be okay probably if it was just a machine, right? We want human contact, but at the same time, it's not like a village. It's not like a little town. There are many great things about that. A lot of small towns are very difficult places to live for people who are not the same as everybody else, for people who want to do something different. So we've lost something precious. I agree with you. It's not obvious how we get it back other than in our one-on-one interactions with each other. I think there's a great thirst for face-to-face. If this seminar if I weren't here right now and you had seen this on a screen as a video, it's not the same. I could say the exact same words. It's not the same when I actually look into your eyes. It's different. And that's true when you have a cup of coffee with a friend and God forbid you have a problem. You don't want to just go to Siri or Google, you have a problem and tell me what I should hear a recording of to make me feel better. You want a human being with a heart who cares about you. So I think all these things are super emergent. They're not under our control. I understand we can be concerned about them. We can certainly take steps as individuals to enhance them. And as parents, we can encourage our kids to see the value of it, but who knows what's going to happen.
That's part of the reason why all the rise in the suicidal rates around the world, I think.
Perhaps. We don't know. Again, it could be. There seems to be some increase of despair, of sadness. At the same time, fewer people are starving to death. I mean, there are a lot of things to be happy about. So it's a mixed bag. Yeah, 8 seconds, Pro Tem.
I just want to extend what Danielle said about the tribal and the sense of them. So I think like in Israel specifically, it's a bit more, even more of a sensitive area. Like Israel was founded about being a Jewish country, and now if you, for example, open it completely to being completely free, global, then any person in the country is going to try and find on the globe where he can optimize his abilities, and then you're obviously going to lose the Jewish state.
Nothing's free.
And I mean, that's fine, but it's a trade-off you need to take into consideration. And the question is, are we willing to do it? So everything is all nice, and we want to become more global and more, more free. But but on the other hand, you're missing out on something here that's possibly very valuable.
Well, my last answer, because I know we have to stop, is that a year ago I would have said, the tide is running against places that emphasize national identity, and we're all moving toward globalization, and the world is one big place. And I'd be wrong, because over the last year, nationalism has become suddenly it was unimaginable to me that the populist nationalist forces in the United Kingdom, in the United States, the Netherlands, France. So it's hard to know what's going to happen, but there are always trade-offs no matter what choice you make. Thank you, folks.